Okay, last video of the night. I want to talk about the Yoruba tone transcription exercise. I don't know which one I said there, but I think the stress is supposed to go on the second syllable there. Anyways, we're not really talking about stress here, though. We're talking about tone. We're talking about register tone in Yoruba, which has both or high, mid, and low tones, and then also falling and rising. I've got some of your tone transcription selected at random. I've got mine here that I think are the case, and we can kind of compare the two. The first two kind of make a set, and again, with tone, you got to just interpret it in context, and it kind of helps if you get develop a framework of interpretation for walking through the various tones, the various items. And I selected your transcriptions at random from different people, so they're not necessarily going to jibe with one another, and that makes it a little bit more difficult to sort of make a comparison because I was doing them all by myself. So there's a systematicity in mind that you might not get in the randomness of yours, but we're just using these as a starting point for discussion anyways. So let's take a listen to number 1 and number 2, which kind of form a pair.
Ori,
That's 1.
Ori.
And that's number 2. So kind of the distinction here between 1 and 2, I can see why this person transcribed this first token as they did. And I'm not going to worry at all about the segmental transcriptions here. What people have done here is basically on target, but we can just focus on the tones for this. So if we look at the pitch track for number 1, we should be able to see what this person was transcribing. So they transcribed it as a mid-tone, followed by a high tone.
Ori, Ori.
And I transcribed it instead as a low tone followed by a rising tone.
Ori.
So those two would pretty much have a similar pattern, right? Low followed by rising versus mid followed by high.
Ori.
Again, you kind of have to put this in context to help it make sense. We can kind of look for other examples here from the examples that might help us interpret it a little bit. So we've got a couple of examples at the end of a low tone at the beginning from 10, 11, 12. There's a couple of examples too of like a mid followed by a high in 1 and 8. We can look at those or maybe listen to them.
Aba.
That's the mid followed by a high compared to this.
Ori.
And maybe you can hear kind of just an overall level difference there. Here's another mid followed by a high.
Oko.
That should sound similar to 1.
Aba.
But I don't think it sounds super similar to this one.
Ori.
That's lower in the scale overall. And we can kind of compare it to, let's say, number 10, which should be a low followed by a rising tone.
Ada.
Versus number 1.
Ori.
And they should look pretty similar on the frequency scale. If the transcription I have is more or less on target. So this one starts out around 115 hertz and then rises up kind of at the tail end to about 192.
Ada.
Versus this one starts out about 110 hertz and rises up to about 198 or so at the end.
Ori.
But that's the same general pattern.
Ada.
A little bit different in terms of absolute frequency. Part of that gets in, you can attribute to the specific vowels at play. High vowels are going to be a little bit higher in frequency than a low vowel like ah, but those are basically the same. So I'd go with, for that one, low followed by a rising. I've got unanimity here on number 2 with whoever this is. So this person transcribed it as a low followed by a falling. And we can compare those two again. This is low followed by rising.
Ori.
And low followed by falling.
Ori.
Yeah, and I think you can hear that difference in the final syllable there, and you can see it as well. There's not a lot of space for this to go for this speaker.
Ori.
So we kind of can't see it fall off the bottom of the table at the very end there. We can change the pitch settings though. These are set for 75 hertz on the low end and 500 on the high end. Most male speakers won't go up quite that high to 500 hertz in tokens like this. So you could kind of constrain it a bit at the top end by reducing the highest level to 300. And maybe we'll lower it a bit at the low end, go to 60. Yeah.
Ori.
And now we can kind of see it fall off the table here at the very end down to like 60 something or 70, 65, something like that.
Ori.
That's what happens when you go from low to low falling to the very end. And this guy's great. He doesn't go into creaky voice.
Ori.
He can just produce a fundamental frequency that low without having to change his voice quality, which is cool. Number 3, a little bit of difference now. We transcribe the vowels, but this is 2 mids followed by each other.
Oko.
So that's good. I won't say more about that. Number 4, a low followed by another falling like we had for number 2.
Oko.
Should sound like that.
Ori.
And I think it does. So good job on that one. Number 5, a low followed by a mid.
Awo.
So instead of falling, it goes up a little bit.
Oko.
That's where it goes down. This is where it goes up
Awo.
to the mid. So we agree on that. Number 6 is 2 mids followed by, or a mid followed by a mid, just like what we had for number 3.
Awo. Oko.
Yeah, and that sounds like a match. Number 7, we've got a mid followed by a falling. So this person, number 7, this candidate transcription did something a little bit different here. Has a high followed by a falling. And then also transcribe this O as more of a diphthong. So put the falling on both of those vowels, which I'm basically okay with that. We can take a listen to it and see what happens in terms of the vowel. But I don't want to focus too much on those vowels because it's hard enough to just figure out what's going on with these tones.
Hawo. Hawo.
And I don't really hear that as diphthongy as the vowel we get in English. O.
O. O. O.
O. O. O. So yeah, that's why I left it just a monophthong O, which makes it easier to transcribe the one tone on that. What might happen if you have an O and it's falling, you might kind of start out with like a high or a mid on the O part of it and then like a lower or a falling part on the U part of it. We don't really have to worry about that. It is falling for sure. So the tone part of that is correct. And there's this little funny thing at the tail end, which is probably just the pitch tracker screwing up. But the question is like, what is going on here with this first tone? It's about at 150 hertz, which I don't think is quite high enough to be high for this particular speaker's pitch range. We can look at some examples of the high tones in the examples is usually the easiest way to kind of contextualize it, I guess. There's a couple here, number 1 and number 8.
Aba.
Yeah, so that's mid going to a high. His mid here for ah was about 144 hertz. His high was 168. So that's why I transcribed this one as starting with mid and then followed by falling, rather than a high followed by a falling. This one is closer to the mid in the examples.
Hawo.
And I think probably sounds more midish. If you compare, say, the first syllable of this one to the first syllable of 6.
Hawo.
Or both syllables of 6.
Hawo. Hawo.
Yeah. Let's play those two side by side.
Hawo. Hawo.
I think that first syllable is a pretty good match as a mid. Yeah, moving right along. Yeah, so Yoruba, like a lot of West African languages or Bantu languages, I think Yoruba might be a Niger-Congo language. Don't quote me on that, but it might not be classified as Bantu. I can't remember for sure. Anyways, a lot of those languages tend to have syllabic nasals. In number 8, we've got one at the beginning.
Mba. Mba.
Yeah, and so I transcribed it as an M. This person transcribed it as an N. Either way, it is syllabic because it's kind of functioning on its own there at the beginning of the utterance.
mm,
I hear it as a and which I kind of expect because the stop following it is ba. So is bilabial, ba is bilabial. It might be doing something a little bit different at the beginning, maybe more n-like and changing to m. Something's going on there. But I'm not worried too much about the segment itself. We can think about the tone. And I've got it transcribed here as something relatively low. It's around 113, kind of in the middle, 115. And then rising at the tail end. So it should sound like what we had for number 1, more or less.
Ori.
Yeah, except it's on a nasal at the beginning, which is kind of cool, right? At least I think it's cool. If you're in this class, maybe you think it's cool too. Number 9, these didn't come through for whatever reason, just from this person's transcription. So I'll just walk you through what I got. For number 9, it looks like it's a high followed by a falling. And again, that first tone is just on the nasal by itself. The second one is 2 highs followed, or one after the other. Yeah, here's the way up there at the high end of his range, like 167. And it stays there. And number 9. Starts out high and then falls at the tail end, right? Yeah. And then number 11 and 12 are kind of a pair, which is interesting. The water is cold versus cold water. And it's kind of signaled by tones almost more than anything else in the language. So cold water is the noun phrase, and then the water is cold is the whole sentence. So let's listen to them both.
Omi tutu. Omi tutu.
And number 12.
Omi tutu. Omi tutu.
And let's play them back to back.
Omi tutu. Omi tutu.
Yeah, so that's cool. He's got a little. First thing I'll mention is he's got a little bit of aspiration with these T's that, when you listen to it closely, kind of sounds like an affricate, like ch, something like that. Maybe you can hear it a little bit better here. So it's, again, talking like the train examples in the previous homework exercise. Like, is that a ch or a tra? And maybe it's a bit of aspiration with like lip rounding on top of it that makes it sound kind of like an S or an esh. I transcribed it as like a T with a superscripted S just to kind of denote that something's going on there. We're not going to worry about that so much. We'll worry instead about the tones. And we can kind of compare them here, I guess. Maybe I'll make these a little bit smaller so you can see my transcriptions. And also the candidate transcriptions. So yeah, what I have here for number 11 is mid followed by high, followed by mid, followed by falling.
Omi tutu.
So mid, high, mid, falling.
Omi tutu.
This person did something a little bit different. They had high, high, low, falling. I think you can see kind of how this lines up, though. So mid, we're in 135, 140 or so in the middle of the range. And then it jumps up a little bit for that high on the second syllable. And then it finally goes down to the bottom end of the range here at the tail end. And we can compare it to this guy. And I think I got, again, unanimity here, or correspondence with the candidate transcription of mid, mid, high, falling.
Omi tutu.
So you can see that difference pretty easily in the first 3 syllables. This is mid, high, mid.
Omi tutu.
And this is mid, mid, high.
Omi tutu.
And this is the falling at the tail end, which is basically the same. Yeah, so that kind of works out. Mid, high should be around 130, 140 or so. This should be 160, 170. Maybe not quite as high as we've seen before, but
Omi tutu.
You get the pattern in context. And that is how you distinguish between cold water and the water being cold in Yoruba, in case you ever need to. You can just look at the pitch track, right? Record what somebody is saying on the fly and just analyze it using Prot. No, I'm not being serious about that, but at least you would know how to do that in case you actually needed to. And you may very well need to have that skill for the midterm tomorrow. So hopefully you've watched through all these videos and have gotten something out of them. But otherwise, I'm done for the night, and I got to post these, so they will be of some use to you. So goodbye for now, and I'll see you virtually tomorrow.